Hello, this is Robert Johnson, and again, welcome to another edition of Lead Well with Robert Johnson. And first of all, I want to thank Media Advisors for this wonderful opportunity to bring and showcase another leader who is really leading well and inspiring others to lead well and really doing their best to transform society. So today I have another phenomenal guest, and that individual is Lawrence James Jr., a PhD, Dr. James, actually, with RHR International. Welcome to Lead Well with Robert Johnson.
Robert, thank you for having me.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am a PhD, as Robert said, in clinical psychology. I got my doctorate from Southern Illinois University and started my undergraduate work at the University of Illinois down in Champaign. Go Illini.
My alma mater.
That's right. The connection. They grew us well.
Exactly.
And for most of my career, actually, I was in clinical practice on my own business. So I was an entrepreneur for about 10 years, leading and running my own business, and learned by trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. And the nice part for me was that allowed me to teach all of my friends who were in clinical practice what not to do. But over time, I felt like there were greater and bigger platforms that I could be in, and that really led me out of clinical practice and into working in consulting. So now I work for a company called RHR International. We are about a $35 million corporation focusing on working with senior leaders in really multinational organizations. So some of our clients are companies like Ace Hardware, AIG, really large matrix organizations. And it's been a wonderful transition for me because it's allowed me to take some of those things that I learned as an entrepreneur and bring them into this larger platform of businesses and really trying to help young up-and-coming leaders as well as seasoned leaders to be better, to be more adept at what they do, to really help people bring young folks along as leaders, but also to be just so much better, much more impactful in their leadership. And it's been 6 years. It's been a wonderful ride so far. I mean, it's just I've got to help develop CEOs of corporations, and not a lot of folks get to say I had a hand in developing the next CEO of XYZ corporation, and then to see them get in that role and really take their organizations not only from a leadership standpoint but economically to a whole nother level. I mean, it's been really a gratifying run.
That's excellent. You also, on a more personal note, just recently performed a study on African American executives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did. So as a little bit of backdrop, when I started at RHR, one of the first things that I did was to sort of look around and say, one, there weren't a lot of African Americans working in consulting, so I was one of the few in my corporation, but I was running into lots of African American executives, and a question started to germinate in my head, which was, I wonder if the experience of these very senior leaders, very successful leaders, was similar or different than their white counterparts. Because we have, in psychology, we tend to have a model that says we focus on deficits, sort of what's wrong as opposed to what's right. And I was at least concerned that what we were doing wasn't necessarily hurting African American executives in their development, but it wasn't necessarily maximally helping them.
Right.
And so the research kind of came out of that premise, and many of my colleagues were kind enough to allow me to meet folks in their networks, African American leaders in very senior roles, presidents, CEOs, vice presidents of organizations. And it was just an opportunity to talk to them and to say, hey, talk to me about your experience of growing up in an organization. What did you have to learn? What didn't you know when you came in? What were the catalysts that allowed you to really reach this level in your organization? And it was fascinating because I didn't have any real belief about what way it was going to go. I was like, it might be exactly the same. What became really fascinating was all of these leaders started to tell me very similar stories about their experiences, the things that they had done that they believed allowed them to be successful. And just as a caveat, one of the things that they said to me was, Lawrence, I had lots of mentors, some black, some white, who helped me to figure out how to make it in the corporate world. and there were things that I didn't know coming in. Nobody told me in school.
Right.
You know, my culture didn't necessarily prepare me for some of those things, because there are some differences, I think, between how black culture functions and how white culture. And I think euphemistically, we talk about business culture in America, but business culture in America is really white culture.
Right.
And black culture and white culture do differ in some ways that I think have a material impact on the ability of African Americans in particular to be successful. And I would say there are similar things for Latinos and Latinas as well as for women, that there are slight cultural differences that for folks like myself, if we don't pay attention to working with those differences and talk about them in a very elaborate way, then we don't really allow our the individuals that we're working with to really reach the heights that their intellect, their leadership abilities naturally might allow them to reach. And so, you know, we talked about things like leveraging your networks, you know, getting a network, first of all, leveraging it when you get it, really thinking strategically about the business, learning how you, something almost as simple as, how does your business make money? You know, lots of leaders coming up, when they start, they really don't even know how their company makes money. So they know, you know, McDonald's makes hamburgers, but they don't really know all the underpinnings of where's the profit. And so I learned from these folks, there are probably 4, 5, 6 things that African Americans need to really target in their development early on in their careers that help them to be successful. Probably the most important one was completely unanticipated and fascinating to me. It was taking risks.
Calculated risk.
Calculated risk, exactly. You know, I'll tell a personal story. When I was growing up, my dad often said to me, he says, I was working for the state at the time, I'll never forget it, he said, I was like, I hate this job. I was like, I want to quit. And he says, boy, why you want to quit a good government job?
That's right.
And literally I was like, I hate it, you know. But for him and people of his era, my grandparents, you know, having good, stable career and taking care of your family was maximally important. And that is the antithesis of taking risks.
Absolutely.
And many, if not most, African American leaders, especially of my age group, I'm 50, that's what they grew up with that mindset. And so it's really antagonistic to growing your career in corporate America. You've got to take risks, whether it's a risk within your particular role or, frankly, taking a risk to get out of your area of competence to say, I mean, you're trained as a lawyer. You know, most folks who would sort of keep their head down would just go up the lawyer track and become a general counsel. You know, a risk is to say, okay, what else is out there? Or when you're earmarked to do something else, you go out of the lawyer track, as you did in your career, and you go into a business track. That's a huge risk. It has some risk of failure, but if you know and understand the risk that you're taking, and you have some confidence, you've kind of built the platforms to help you to be successful. You know, if you make it, if you are successful in doing it, it actually catapults your career. And we saw this with the executives that we talked to, the ones who really got to the top of organizations. They were the folks who would, you know, by hook or by crook, had taken the opportunity, had taken a risk, a calculated risk with their careers. And then when they got in those roles, they had knocked it out of the park. And as a result, they didn't just take a one-step leap, they often took 2- and 3-step leaps to extremely senior roles in their organizations, vice presidents, presidents, CEOs of organizations. And so I've taken that data and really tried to put it all together into a package to say, here are the experiences that African American leaders need to be aware of and understand from a background standpoint, as well as within their careers, to help them to get themselves in front of other senior leaders and to really allow them to reach the heights, as I said before, that their skill sets, their capabilities could allow them to reach. Because what we see is the folks who don't take those opportunities kind of concomitantly, they really don't reach the levels. And, you know, we see most corporations right now are really good at bringing in persons of color, women, into their organizations. Where they're failing, if you've seen all the data recently about Silicon Valley, you know, there are lots of women, there are lots of persons of color who are coming in, but none of them are reaching the tops of their organization. And there's a real reason for that. Some of that is how the organizations are set up and what they're focusing on. And some of it, frankly, is also the skill sets that many folks need to continue to develop to allow them to get to the top of the organizations. And what we're doing from a development perspective, and what we're saying from a development perspective, is here are some steps, here are some tools, here are some skills that you need to develop that will allow you to be successful and reach those heights that you want to reach in your career.
That's outstanding work. How can folks get more information about this, or how can they contact you?
Absolutely. So we just published a white paper on this topic back in June, and it's available on our website at www.rhrinternational.com. Equally, folks can reach me either via my Twitter account at LAWRJA115, or via my email, ljames@rhrinternational.com.
Okay, excellent. Last question. What are you passionate about? What drives you?
You know what? I at the end of the day, I am really passionate about helping Black, brown people reach their potential, and to really be able to, and that potential is wherever your skills can take you. If that's to the top of an organization, I want to help you to get there. And so I focus a lot of my energy on helping those folks to understand where some of the barriers are to them getting successful, and trying to position them so that they can be. I think the other real passion that I have in my life that's growing and growing and growing as I've gotten more into business is a real strong belief that our model for business is actually wrong. And I know that might sound controversial, but we are really working from a corporate model that was developed in the 1920s or 1930s by Pierre DuPont, who was really the first person to sort of come up with this idea of the matrix organization. In some ways, it's quite hierarchical. I think the next wave that I've been thinking about in business is going to be much more collaborative rather than hierarchical, less teamwork oriented in some respects, but it's going to be about maximizing your individual strengths and capabilities, and me maximizing mine and other people maximizing theirs for the benefit of a, if you will, singular idea, whether that's coming together to do not-for-profit work. We're going to leverage all of our skills and focus on that. Whether it's in a business context to say, here's where we're trying to go, new product development, whatever it may be. And I'm not going to say, okay, let's all conform, but I'm going to say, you have these amazing skills, and I want you to blow it out, and really run with what you know. And I'm going to run with what I know. But we're always going to keep focused on what's the end point. We're trying to get to this one point. It's something that's germinating in my head. It gives me a lot of energy. I don't know exactly where my thinking on it will go, but I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And when I'm working in corporations, I think a lot about that with helping companies to go, because companies want to get the best out of the people that they have. And I think sometimes they don't do it because they're trying to put everybody into the little box.
Right.
To conform. And I think it's a lot of why you see young people, in fact, not wanting to work in large corporations because they don't want to be pigeonholed in that box. And where we have to help them and everybody else is maximize your skill sets, what you do well, but let's maximize it in a focused way to get somewhere for the benefit of X, Y, and Z organization, if that's what it is, or for X, Y, and Z cause. And we're seeing some of that happen. If you think about some of the social media campaigns that have been particularly effective, I think they're doing some of that. So that's something that I'm real passionate about, and I think it allows everybody to really leverage their skills and what they do really, really well.
That's fascinating. Well, I look forward to seeing some further information and collaboration around that. So again, thank you.
Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
So also I'd like to thank Meet Advisors again for allowing us the opportunity to bring another outstanding leader to you, and hopefully as you learn from James' example, always remember to lead well. Thanks.